So there's a plate, there's this thing that looks like a half a basketball, and when it's on, you can't come anywhere near it. You can't touch it.
Right.
What is gravity about that? Like the concept of gravity to most people is gravity is bringing something towards it.
Right. Well, I guess you would say it's anti-gravity. It's gravity shifted 180 degrees. It's, anti-gravity.
And did they have any understanding about what could possibly create this effect? Did they have any areas where they'd like you to look into?
No, they knew there was a fuel source in it, and they were proficient at making it work. And again, my analogy to something like this is you can drop a motorcycle off in the wagon train days and just leave it with the keys parked outside, somebody's place. Everybody will come around it and they'll poke and prod, and eventually they'll turn the key, get it to start, and become proficient at riding it.
Yeah.
But they won't be able to understand what the hell's going on. They won't be able to make the plastic fender, much less anything else. And I think that's exactly the state we were at. We played around with the parts long enough before I got there where they could make the reactor operate, take the fuel out, and know that it makes it work. How exactly what was going on in the reactor remained a mystery at the time. I think we made some progress on what was going on inside, but I don't think anybody really knew anything. They could just watch what was going on and make note of it.
How long were you there?
I'd say about 6 months or so.
And what progress was made while you were there?
Well, we came up with a bunch of reasonably good ideas about how the reactor worked. And one of them was the square base of it was essentially like a cyclotron, which is a small particle accelerator, a circular one. Particle accelerators, linear particle accelerators are just a, long tube essentially, and they accelerate particles with high voltage and, radio frequencies till they reach high speeds. But a cyclotron does that in a small circular area. And there's this very heavy element fuel, element 115, something that wasn't on our periodic charts at the time.
But it is now.
It is now, yeah.
When did it become on the periodic table now, the way the charts now?
I don't remember. Do you remember when they...
2004, Darmstadt, Germany, I think, is where they first fabricated 4 atoms. They lasted 220 milliseconds with the atoms. It's nothing, right? And then it later was discovered a couple more times they could fabricate it. Then they gave it a place then on the periodic chart. After that, called it moscovium.
So they told you about this stuff in 1982?
Yeah, well,
no,
we
not
kind of...
1982.
What year was this?
It was 88 and 89 when I was there.
Oh, okay.
82 is when
82 was when you were at Los Alamos. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So 88, 89, they told you about this stuff. So this was not like...
No, they didn't tell me about it. That's one of the things that this group came up with. The God, I keep losing my train of thought with this thing.
So this one area, this element 115 was the fuel.
Yeah, it was the fuel.
The world will forgive you for having a migraine. Can I just?
It's really hard to think through this. Just give me a minute.
We'll just give you more booze.
I just want to say one. Yeah, definitely. I was going to say one thing. Bob, for the last 30 years, people have just been on the attack on Bob. Getting to know him, the personal effects on his life. It's really hard to understand unless you meet his family and his wife. I mean, this is the last thing he wanted to fucking do was have to talk.
Yeah, we should explain that, Jeremy. That you and I had this conversation. I watched your documentary. We had this conversation, and I said, I have to talk to him.
Yeah.
The document, there's been detractors. There's been a bunch of people that called bullshit on many of the things that you've said. But over time, many of the things that you talked about, even in the 80s, have proven to be true. Things that people said were not true were proven to be true. Element 115 was one of them. Right?
Right. Element 115, the fuel they had, was stable. In other words, it didn't decay. It wasn't emitting radioactivity. When they synthesized 2 or 3 atoms of the 115, it did decay, and it was not a stable element. So they're kind of 2 different things. But this is kind of typical. Elements always have, or pretty much always have, stable isotopes and unstable isotopes. Like I think cesium has like 30 unstable isotopes to it. So, hydrogen, for example, you're familiar with hydrogen gas. It's stable. It's not radioactive. But there's also two other types of hydrogen, deuterium and tritium. And deuterium isn't radioactive. It's another stable isotope of hydrogen. But tritium is radioactive. Now, they're all hydrogen, but they just have different amounts of neutrons. So it's the same thing with other elements and element 115. Depending on the amount of neutrons it has, designates the isotope, but it's 115. They will continue to take or experiment and try and make 115 at different isotopes, and I'm sure eventually they'll come up with a stable version, but it's the stable version that has the properties that we're talking about.
So they somehow or another had acquired a stable version. Did they say that the stable version had come with this craft?
Yeah, it absolutely came with the craft, yeah.
So at the time, you having a firm knowledge of the periodic chart and knowing what was real and what wasn't real, what was your reaction to having this stable element 115 that wasn't even supposed to exist?
Well, everything was impossible.